Hi guys, this is Bill with Media Unlocked, and we're going through the menu systems for the Canon EOS-R mirrorless camera today. We're going to start off in this video and focus on the camera autofocus setting menus. Then in our next video, we're going to come back with the playback, the wrench, and the customizable features. So let's go ahead and get started with our image quality menu setting. Now, the menu system for the Canon EOS-R is incredibly complex. There are several different ways of activating it. You can use the dial, that will rotate around. You can use this dial, and that will rotate your pages. If you want to move from one screen quickly to another one, you can just use the touch screen to get to the first menu in any of the menu settings. So we're going to start off with the camera settings here. These are basically on image quality. We've got 6 pages of menu options here. Some of them are kind of long, some of them are kind of short. But I'm going to go through each of the options here so that you can get an idea of what they are. Your image quality is to select your RAW and JPEG settings. I always shoot RAW. Compressed RAW is always available for you. I don't recommend that because it's a smaller file size. Your JPEG setting, to not record a JPEG, to use a large file setting, medium, or small. If you're going to shoot, I recommend either the medium setting or the large setting. Small setting doesn't give you enough information. Whether or not you shoot the JPEG, of course, is completely up to you. Dual pixel RAW. Dual pixel RAW is kind of a fun little option. You can enable it or disable it. Now, this is something I want to show you here very quickly. You see this little info help that just popped up? Whenever you see this, hit the info button, and it's kind of like a little user's guide. It will tell you exactly what that button does. Really recommend that. It's kind of cool to have that there. Now, the dual pixel RAW, you know there are 2 layers of pixels on the sensor. The dual pixel RAW allows you, when you use Canon's post-processing software, to activate both layers of pixels at the same time. What that allows you to do is tweak your focus just a little bit after you take the shot. Moral of the story is, if you get it a little bit soft, that will allow you to sharpen up the image and bring it into focus. It's not going to fix an out of focus image, but it will fix something that's just a little soft. I always recommend that you play with these, by the way, but you do have to have Canon's software in order to use that. Cropping aspect ratio, you can set your crop to any of the standard settings. I really recommend leaving it to full at all times because your post-processing software will allow you to crop it, and that gives you the best options. Image review, you can turn it off, you can turn it on. This is how long after you take an image it pops up on the screen. I usually like to set mine for either 2 or 4 seconds, depending upon what I'm shooting. Release shutter without card. Well, if you don't have a card in the card slot, it's not going to allow you to release the shutter and take an image. Of course, without a card, you can't record the image. I'm really not quite sure why this is on here, but it is. If we go over to the second screen, you have lens aberration correction and external speedlight control. I always recommend that you leave the lens aberration correction where it is. It's going to find out what lens you've got, and it's going to give any known issues a chance to be corrected in camera. The external speedlight control gives you your speedlight options. You can have your flash fire or not. You can set it to TTL for evaluative or average metering. All of these things are things you're going to want to play with. Now, some of the settings are good for some types of flash. Some settings are good for other types of flash. So I really recommend that you put your flash on and experiment to find the settings that really work for you. We go back into our next screen at this point. Your exposure compensation. I leave that set to 0. I don't really use it that much. Other people do use it a lot. Again, you can set it this way and work through the way you like it. Your ISO speed settings. This allows you to customize your ISO availabilities. If you want to, you can limit your ISO. You can set it to your automatic range so that it never goes above or below a certain point. You can set your minimum shutter speed. All of these you can explore based upon your type of shooting. If you go to your auto lighting optimizer, I would note, for example, it's disabled when you're in the manual or bulb modes. Just keep that out there. Again, something that you're going to play with to give you a chance to have a different exposure. I keep mine set to standard pretty much all the time. Highlight tone priority. This gives you better highlight images. I usually leave it to the default setting on this one. Metering timer, 8 seconds. You can set your metering to any length of time before it shuts off. 8 seconds is a good amount. It'll give you a chance to find your focus, find your evaluative metering, whatever you're using, and then get on with your shooting. If you have it too long, you're going to use a lot of battery. Again, 8 seconds is usually where I go. The exposure simulation is a really good feature to leave enabled. When you look through the viewfinder, what that's going to do is give you an approximation of what your exposure looks like. Really good idea. Okay, shifting over to the next screen, you've got your white balance options. These 3 options right here. They allow you to set your white balance, any of the standard options. I usually shoot Kelvin temperature because I like to balance mine with my studio lights, but I do most of my work inside of a studio. Right now you can tell I've got it set to auto. If you want to set a custom, you can talk about your shift, things like that right in there. Just explore your options and see what works best for you. Color space, I prefer Adobe RGB. Some people prefer sRGB. You can pick either one. Your picture style. Now this is something that you really want to explore. There are a lot of submenus under this one. Basically what this is that you have 6 variables. Let's call up the info here so you can see exactly what they are. You get strength, you get sharpness, strength, fineness, threshold, contrast, saturation, color tone. All of these are sliders that you can set up to give you slightly different picture styles, okay? Play with the settings, see which ones you like best. If we move on to the next screen, you have long exposure and high ISO noise reduction. I usually leave those turned off. The reason behind it is that I find that I can take care of any noise issues that pop up in my post-production software better than I can deal with in camera. So I tend to leave those set off pretty much all the time. Dust delete data. That takes a look at your sensor. Tries to figure out for you whether you have any dust issues on your sensor. And again, touch shutter. This is a really cool feature. If you've got it enabled, anytime you touch the screen when you're active, it will focus and then shoot for you. I tried that taking pictures of my dog. I wanted to try to capture him at the exact moment that he grabbed a treat out of midair. I'll show you the best example here if I can find one that works. It wasn't exactly cooperative because, well, my dog is a lazy mutt and didn't look too good on camera, but that's okay. We tried it anyway, but this is a cool feature. I enjoyed playing with it. Right now I'm going to turn it off because it can be kind of distracting. And if you're shooting for multiple exposure or HDR, those are grayed out right now. They're not active in the mode that I'm using up here. If I shift my mode, they will be live, and you can take your settings that way. Bulb timer, silent shutter, high-speed display, all of those are grayed out on this particular menu, again, because I'm set to my partial exposure mode to give you the best menu settings. But if you shift over to, for example, manual, you'll have access to all of those. Bulb timer, silent shutter, high-speed display, all good. The anti-flicker shooting. Now this is a cool feature. You know that within fluorescent lights you tend to have a flicker issue, which means you get inconsistent lighting. When you activate this, your camera actually measures the flickering of your fluorescent lights, finds the flicker pattern, and then shoots between the flickers. That way you get better and more consistent lighting. Silent shooting. Again, if you want to go quiet, that's the way to do it. Okay, your autofocus menu. First option is for autofocus operation. You can see right now I've got it for one shot. This is good if you're shooting a portrait or in a studio where you hit it once and then you hit it again. If you want to shift over, you can go to servo focusing, which is a form of continuous autofocus. I usually leave it to one shot unless I'm shooting sports or something that is actively moving. Autofocus method. Now this is one that's going to be set up based upon your shooting style. If we go over to the far left, this here, which I kind of call the face icon for obvious reason, is for your face or eye tracking. You have to hit this in order to activate the eye tracking method. This one gives you 1-point autofocus. This one gives you expanded autofocus, around expanded autofocus. Now those are the four main areas, and frankly, I almost always use 1-point AF. If you go to these over here to zone AF, it gives you far more features, either a vertical stack, a horizontal stack, or just large groups. I don't ever use those. I don't like my camera to make focusing decisions for me, and this gets too much power to the camera. I usually leave it on 1 point or go to the slightly expanded version. Your autofocus frame size is grayed out at the moment, but in different modes. When you have that available, it changes the size of the square of your autofocus from large to small. Frankly, I can't see why you'd ever want to use a small, but I guess there might be something I'm missing there. Your eye detection autofocus is grayed out at the moment. I cannot activate it because I would need to shift over to the autofocus method. Use that, go to set, and now you see I've got eye detection AF. I just need to turn it on. Now it's going to track based upon the eyes of what I'm trying to shoot. I'm going to go back to this here and leave it that way. Continuous autofocus. Now you might think that's servo focusing. It's really not. Continuous autofocus, when you activate it, basically the camera decides to focus its own self. And you don't have to hit the shutter button. As you point and move with your camera, you move it around, it changes the focal point so that it is always in focus. That is going to affect, by the way, your frames per second rate if you're using burst photography. Touch and drag autofocus settings. Now this is really cool. On all of the other Canons that I've used, you'd have different numbers of focal points, and you address that with little buttons right up here on the corner of the camera. With this being enabled, basically, you enable the touch and drag autofocus. Then you set your active zone. I like it set to the right. Okay, and you can check your relative position. Relative is a good one. Absolute is a little too precise for me. Once it's set this way, go back over here. I focus now using my thumb on the touch screen. So if I've got my finger on the shutter button, my thumb on the touch screen, this allows me to change my focal point. And it's so much faster than the old activating the buttons kind of thing that was up here. I really recommend that you play with that. Once you get good with that, you're going to have an amazing amount of focal change ability in the way you shoot. Going to the next screen, your manual focus peaking settings, your focus guide. These are really good for manual focus options if you want to play with it. Okay, manual focus peak settings. Basically, you set your color to red, for example. You have high and low settings here, and on or off. If you turn it on to red, for example, with high, the areas that are in focus will be highlighted red in your viewfinder. Lets you know exactly how much focus you've got. It's kind of a cool feature if you're working, for example, video. Focus guide assists you with your focusing again as well. Okay, if I go into my manual mode for a moment, I should be able to activate this particular set of menus. Tracking sensitivity. This button here allows your camera, or allows you to set your camera to different levels of tracking sensitivity. Now, the advantage to having it more sensitive, of course, is that you get a better shot at focusing. The advantage to having it more responsive is that it changes faster. Acceleration and deceleration of your tracking, again, the shifting over of your autofocusing. You're going to want to play with all three of these settings and work with exactly what you're looking for. I usually leave them to the default because, frankly, I don't use tracking that much. Okay, the electronic manual focus. This is really cool. When you look through your viewfinder, if you have this enabled, basically it allows two little gauges to get closer and closer together. When they touch, they turn green, you hear the beep, you have hit your focal point. This is exactly where you want to shoot. I shoot a lot of macro, I shoot a lot of focus stacking, and this is a really, really handy dandy little tool for manual focusing with either of those. Your autofocus assistant beam firing in front, you can turn it on or off. Some people like it, some people don't. I like it if I'm shooting low light, but for example, if you don't want people to notice that you're shooting, you do want to turn that off. One shot focus release, focal priority to release or focus. Now, this gives you the option to let the camera find perfect focus and then fire, or fire, leaving the focus a little soft sometimes when it's important to catch the shot, even if it's just a little bit soft. Work between them, there are different options. Moving on to the next screen. Lens drive when autofocus is impossible. This is kind of an interesting variation. Basically, do you want the camera to continue searching for focus when it can't find it, or eventually stop? That's what you want to set it to. It's just a decision-making process for you. Limit your autofocus methods. Now, this is something that will help you shoot faster if you use it properly. If, for example, you never use these three options here, I never do, turn them off. That way, when you scroll through your autofocus options, you only have 4 to go through instead of the 7. It'll give you a much faster way of going through your autofocusing. Orientation linked autofocus point. Now this is kind of cool. In most cameras, when you're shooting during the landscape versus portrait mode, you have all of your options down here in your viewfinder. When you go to portrait mode, now they're on the side in kind of a strange orientation. Okay, the orientation linked autofocus point. Let's say I've got my autofocus point set on the far left-hand side of my sensor. Well, when I shift over to portrait mode, that far left-hand side is now underneath, right? If I activate this, it shifts back up here to keep the same orientation point. Moving on, the initial servo autofocus point for your facial detection. I always leave this set to auto. The camera does a great job of picking that. It doesn't need any of my help.
You guys have made it this far. If you want to check out our newest video, it will be right here. If you want to check out the product, it will be down here. If you do happen to click on it and purchase it, it does give us a little bit of commission, and that helps me a lot keep making these videos. And of course, guys, right down below, go and leave a comment, hit that subscribe button, follow along. We'll catch you next time.